I'm Julianne DeLynn Hatton, and you're listening to Faith and Reason on the Mormon Faircast. This series will discuss the prophet Joseph Smith and the authenticity of the gospel he restored. I'll be speaking with Michael R. Ash, author of the book of Faith and Reason, 80 Evidences Supporting the Prophet Joseph Smith. Welcome, Michael Ash.
Hi, Julianne.
We haven't spoken for a while. We took a nice break.
Yes, we did.
You were doing some photography. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm an avid photographer, and I had back-to-back trips to Bryce Canyon twice and to the Tetons once, and got a lot of fun photography in it, and I think some decent shots as well.
What was the most interesting / difficult picture that you took there?
Well, I went with a friend, and we were trying to get some moonlit landscape shots and Milky Way shots. And so getting up, really earlier than I normally do to get out and shoot the Milky Way in the Tetons, we were shooting at 3 degrees. And so it was a little chilly, and at one point I stepped off the trail that went through the snow and sank up to my waist in the snow. So,
oh no!
Yeah. So, but great stories to tell after the fact now.
Did you get the shot?
I got some great shots. Yes.
That's the
I'm
question.
Pretty happy with what I got. Yeah.
So we're back. You wrote a recent article.
Yeah, hiding church history in plain sight.
Tell me about that, because there was a great response. I read the article. I thought there was some new information in it that was extremely helpful, recommended it to a lot of friends.
Well, thanks. Yeah. But basically, it was in response to an email that I had received that somebody was concerned that the church supposedly had lied to him. It was actually from another friend, and somebody had sent them an email, a family member. And I hear that frequently, is that a member that's struggling with issues, what many times precipitates that struggling or kind of goes hand in hand with it is they discover some information that they hadn't known about before, and then they wonder, well, why hasn't the church taught me about this? I think the church has lied to me. And when people feel like they've been lied to, there's a feeling of infidelity that goes on, and it feels like broken trust. And so sometimes that feeling becomes the main reason why people actually can leave the church rather than the issues themselves. Because if they find answers to the issues, those answers don't always mean anything to them anymore, because they feel like it's too late now because that trust has been broken. And so my article on LDS.net points out that this isn't the case, that there have been a number of these issues that have been discussed in official church publications or publications that the church has something to do with, perhaps peripherally through BYU and what was the Old Farms, that talk about these issues, even sometimes the church manuals. And of course, they don't go into it real deep because that's not what the church curriculum is all about. But they have been mentioned, and unfortunately, people of members of the church, like general members of the United States, we don't do a lot of investigative reading. We read novels, we watch reality shows. We just don't spend a lot of time in the type of research that we really should be doing. And in fact, in my book, Shaken Faith Syndrome, I talk about how a lot of people aren't familiar with some of the basic historical events in the United States. And so it's really no wonder that sometimes we're not aware of information that's really in plain sight. So the church hasn't hidden this stuff. The church focuses on teaching members how to become better members, better fathers, mothers, siblings, members of the ward. And there are answers to these questions, and we have to get past that feeling of broken trust and actually look at the responses that are available.
Well, that's how I became familiar with you, was through the book Shaken Faith Syndrome. And there's 2 things I really enjoyed about the book. Number one is that you show respect for the reader. I never felt like I was being condescended to or that you were talking down to your reader, even though it's very well documented. And I think that's important because when people are struggling with issues, and like you say, they feel that they've been lied to or deceived, they want to be respected.
Sure. Yeah. There's lifelong members that are, have degrees, advanced degrees from college, that are business professionals, that are, educated on their own and so forth. And these are real feelings of pain and distrust. And so, I know people that are close to me that have gone through this. And so I certainly can empathize that when somebody encounters challenging information, that it can be a very painful blow to not only the ego, but as far as the spiritual outlook of, and it makes you even wonder, is there really a God? Have I been following, myths and so forth? And these pains, difficulties are real. The thing is that there's answers. There are answers to any of the objections that are out there. There are evidences that support belief. And so what's important for those people that encounter challenging issues is to kind of take a step back and don't let those hurt emotions get in the way. Let's look at the issues that are actually there. Let's look at the responses and see how they make sense. And a testimony can actually be strengthened through this type of a trial. I know that I've gone through, a similar trial in my younger years, and we can come through this with a stronger testimony because we realize that the Lord works through weak humans, just like, we're weak and fallible. Well, all of Heavenly Father's children are fallible and have weaknesses. And the Lord works through weaknesses in the prophets, and so he can work through our weaknesses as well and make those weak things strong.
I agree. And I think that leads me to the second thing that was so comforting when I read Shaken Faith Syndrome was that it's so thorough. I mean, I have to admit that as a lifelong member of the church, there were questions that were answered in that book that I've never had answers to that were as satisfying. So it's very thorough, and I think it really is a great companion of Faith and Reason, because to me, Shaken Faith Syndrome is the starting place, and a Faith and Reason is sort of a companion because you actually bring up some new issues and solutions and interesting things about the prophet and the Book of Mormon of Faith and Reason.
Yeah, it's interesting because after I finished Shaken Faith Syndrome, and my objective was to answer those challenging issues that people discovered. And as I had finished it off and it was actually going to press, I got to thinking that I really hadn't pointed out all the many affirmative evidences that bolster the faith. And so right away, I dug up through my files and started working on A Faith and Reason because I wanted that as a companion book. I felt like the shield had been put up in Shaken Faith Syndrome, and now the sword needed to be brought out and show that there's actually strength behind the arguments for belief, and that we can move forward and not just say there's no evidence for belief. There is evidence. There's evidence for the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. There's evidence that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And these are not proofs, obviously. They're evidence that everybody has to, bring into their own paradigm and their worldview. But for somebody that is searching for the truth and wants to rely on what the Spirit is teaching them as truth, there are secular evidences that not only defend the belief, but also support the belief.
Well, that's where we're leading today. We're halfway through of Faith and Reason, 80 Evidences Supporting the Prophet Joseph Smith. It's hard to believe that this is actually going to come to an end at some point.
Yep.
So why don't you introduce the topic this week?
Okay, so this one, a little bit on the Book of Mormon, Sheum, which is mentioned in the Book of Mormon as one of the crops that is grown in the 2nd century along with barley. And the Book of Mormon doesn't give us a translation for this, so we have no idea from the Book of Mormon what Sheum is. And of course, critics have pointed that out as well. It's like, well, this is an interesting made-up word of Joseph Smith's. We never heard of such a thing. And so at least in Joseph Smith's day, this was, I guess, a sign of the Book of Mormon as fiction. It was evidence they saw as fiction because no such thing existed.
So the critics have said this is a word or product that Joseph Smith made up. Has there been any evidence to the contrary?
Yeah, in fact, like I said, in Joseph Smith's day there wasn't, but within the last, several decades, non-Mormon scholars have, learned more about the ancient inhabitants of the Near East, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, what they call the Akkadians from Mesopotamia. They learned about an important cereal grain that was known as Sheum. In fact, this one non-Mormon specialist of ancient Babylonian languages, he says that the word Sheum was applied to different types of grains. At times, it might have been applied to pine nuts or barley or grains in general. And we find the same kind of theme many times in the old world, is that words were used to mean different things at different times and in different circumstances. And that's what we find with Sheum, but it's a real word. And it's interesting that it comes from the right area because it's used in the Book of Mormon among the Jaredites. And so the Jaredites, we believe, came from Mesopotamia. So they were familiar, apparently, with this word Sheum and brought the word with them and probably used it for a New World grain. Again, we don't know what that would have been exactly, but they took a habit or methodology, I guess, of naming things from the Old World, took an actual name from the Old World, and then applied it to New World grains.
Thank you, Michael Ash.
Thank you, Julianne.
Thanks for listening to Faith and Reason on the Mormon Faircast. I'm your host, Julianne DeLynn Hatton, inviting you to keep the faith.
Michael R. Ash is the author of the book Shaken Faith Syndrome, Strengthening One's Testimony in the Face of Criticism and Doubt, as well as the book Of Faith and Reason, 80 Evidences Supporting the Prophet Joseph Smith. Faith and Reason is produced by Tom Hatton with music courtesy of Arthur Hatton. The opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of Fair Mormon or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it in iTunes and by rating it and writing a review. Questions or comments can be sent to podcast@fairmormon.org, or you may join the conversation at fairblog.org.